All right, members, if I can get you to take your seats, and folks in the audience, if you'll kind of find a place to have a seat or stand. All right, we apologize for starting late. We're going to try to get going here. Let me just kind of give you an overview of the agenda. We've got a lot of things to cover. We've got Mr. Stephen, I think, is coming in a little bit later. His plane had issues last night, so he'll be here shortly. We are going to cover the agenda items A through F, and then we're going to take a break for lunch, or depending on what time it works out, because we expect item G and H to have some significant discussion. And so we'll give folks an opportunity to take a break before we press on to that. So that's going to kind of be the order of the day. And again, we'll have some more comments before we start item G and H. I think from the chairs, it's a culmination of a lot of work, and I know we're all excited about getting it done. So, having said that, Mr. Co-Chair, you have anything to add? All right, first item on the agenda is adoption of the minutes, which are in your packet, Exhibit C from the February 17th meeting. Can I make a motion to approve those? Motion second, all in favor, say aye. Minutes are adopted. Okay, item D. We're going to have an update on several different things here. So, Richard, are you going to be driving the show here in John's absence?
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Richard Kellogg. I'm with Steve Group. John will be here, as Chair said, hopefully around 10:30 or so. This whole team is going to take on this presentation, and I'm going to introduce everybody first here.
I'm Stephen Palmer, I'm senior consultant with the Steve Group.
Good morning, I'm Rory Richard, senior consultant with the Steve Group.
I'm Sheila Cooper, senior consultant with Steve Group.
And each one of our team is already prepared to address the different sections of the presentation this morning. Stephen will start us off.
Okay.
Thank you very much. So, starting on slide 3 here, there was a question raised since the last meeting about the private option recipient account. This slide just provides an update on that from the last several months. Current recipient account for the latest was for February was the total unique recipient account was 273,246. That number has been rising over the last several months, and to go back through and reiterate some of our findings regarding the impact of the private option on state funds. First, I wanted to go through and review the assumptions that went into these estimates. There were a number of, or several Medicaid eligibility groups where there has been a decrease in expenditure since the PO was established. And the assumption is that some or all of those decreases in expenditures would go away and those expenditures would go back up to their pre-PO levels if the private option would be removed. There are a number of waiver programs that were in place prior to the establishment of the private option that we anticipate some or all would be reestablished at their prior levels, primarily because several of them are known to save states money. One example there is family planning. That waiver was funded at a 90-10 federal match rate, and the CMS started allowing that type of waiver specifically because it had been shown to save money. The third major cost-saving assumption regarding the impact of the private option on state funds is regarding the uncompensated care that had been previously directly state funded. That was mostly to UAMS, but also to corrections and a few other places. The assumption there is some or all of it would be replenished to its previous level. Then there is, on the revenue side, premium tax associated with the private option, which would all go away if the private option were removed. And then there's also the assumption that some amount of economic activity is being driven by additional federal funds associated with the private option, which would be reduced or go away entirely if the private option were removed. Going on to slide 5. This slide is in the same format that we've seen before. There was also the question raised by Senator Hendren last time about the particular expenditures associated with the private option and why between a couple of our projections they have remained the same. We did go back to the agency and get the latest expenditure data on the private option and project that forward. And so that top line private option expenditures represents the projections based on the latest actual expenditure data on private option. One thing to note is that the actual enrollment figures currently being experienced in the private option are higher than had initially been anticipated. However, the per person expenditures are actually lower than had been previously anticipated by a substantial amount, such that the overall private option expenditure trend or actuals today are lower than they had been anticipated initially. So looking at this table, it's broken up into 2 blocks. The top block within the impact on state funds section is the impact on state expenditures, and the next block is the impact on state revenue. The 5-year estimated impact of the private option on state funds is in the bottom right of the table at $757 million, and that is in general fund number.
So if I can just, again, I just want to make sure for the slow learner group that I'm tracking with you. Back in October, you gave us a very similar chart based on data from August, and this lower right number, in other words, the net benefit to the taxpayers of Arkansas at that time was $438 million was our estimate for the upcoming 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. $438 million. We made a lot of thinking about the $438 million. We got new data, new estimates, and at our last meeting, you guys had updated the chart and said, based on the new data and actual numbers that we're experiencing, it's not $438 million. We think it's $637 million. So it's $200 million higher in our estimate of what we're going to save in the next 5 years for Arkansas taxpayers. Then there was some questions about it. There was more data that was gathered. You guys were in the process of crunching more of the new data, and we're now back less than a month later, and the estimate is not $438 million in savings to taxpayers. not 637 million to taxpayers, but now we're at $757 million in savings to Arkansas taxpayers directly in the general revenue arena. Is that a proper assessment of what we've got here?
Yes, that is an accurate description of the process that has taken us to this point. The main things that have changed have been the recognition of additional information coming in, particularly from the first estimate to the most recent one. We have 2 quarters of actual additional experience with the programmatic savings that are lower than the trend that we had previously been using to estimate it.
Okay, we've got a couple questions. Representative Ferrari, you recognize.
Thank you, Chair. Do we, if the private option was in, do we know how many people would go back on the traditional Medicaid?
I don't have that number exactly. These numbers are based on expenditures associated with the people that are anticipated to go back on regular Medicaid. And it's not even individual, necessarily specific individuals that have gone from Medicaid to private option and might go back. It is in many cases individuals that never went on Medicaid in the first place. But in fact,
That's the number I'm asking.
Yes.
What the,
I don't have a number.
we got 200, I guess the number you have given me, 273,000.
Yeah.
How many people were on traditional Medicaid system, 0 to 17%? Now we have 273. Out of that 270, what's the difference between the two numbers that we're going to actually put back on the traditional Medicaid system at 30%?
Yeah, I don't have that number.
Thank you.
But we can get that for you.
Representative Boyd, you recognize.
Like Representative thank you, Mr. Chair. Like Representative Collins, slow learner group over here. Okay, so does this take into account the growth and the number of patients on the Medicaid expansion?
Yes, this takes into, it's a projection based on the most recent expenditures in the private option.
Okay, so the 273,000 is what these numbers are based on.
It's based on the expenditures associated with that population, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Representative Hammer, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I want to go back to your answer to Representative Farrar. If we don't have those numbers, how soon could we get those numbers? Because it seemed to me that we would want to know that for decisions that are forthcoming. So how soon could we get those numbers?
I'm not sure. I have to. Okay.
Can I ask a question related to that? Because we've got 2 animals here. Animal number 1 is the number of heads that move in one direction or another. And then animal number 2 is the cost impact of those heads moving from one place to another, correct? So what we've essentially got on your chart, state fund savings from cost shifting from traditional Medicaid to PO, 91 million, 96 million, 101 million, 106 million. Those are based on individual groups and heads, so there's some estimate associated with those numbers. If we could just perhaps look in how you calculated that and whatever estimates of groups of people, that may be close enough, even though I realize it might not be an exact head count that was actually used in putting this table together. That may be an easier solution or quicker one is all I'm suggesting.
And Mr. Chair, may I ask a question? I'm sorry I'm talking a little out loud here, but I guess the reason I want to know that information, or tell me if I'm wrong in where I'm going, is that if this afternoon Arkansas Works goes away or stays, we're going to need to know what the true financial impact is, and will we not have to have the numbers that were just referenced to have a full idea? I know what the savings are based now, but if we have to go back to what we were doing before private option came into play, would we not have to have those numbers in order to have somewhat of an idea, or am I thinking wrong?
Well, I don't think you're thinking wrong. I think what they're describing here is they're converting it into dollars. So again, and if I'm not interpreting this table right, jump in and correct me as I'm trying to share what I see here. So to the answer to your question, Representative Hammer, would be that they're projecting that in 2017, there will be a $91 million increase in Arkansas state match on traditional Medicaid by virtue of the populations that are currently being served in the private option, who would then qualify to go back on Medicaid at a 70-30 match. And how many bodies that is, that part I don't know from this, but what they're projecting is that $91 million worth of cost for the care of those people would be incurred by the traditional Medicaid program. Am I interpreting this right?
Yeah, that's correct, and you could even expand that a little bit to include the line prior to the one that you're looking at, where you have the state fund savings from the optional Medicaid waiver programs, because with the exception of the Air Health Network waiver, the others are demonstrated cost saving waivers and would presumably be reinstated.
Madam Mr. Chair. So is 91 million what we would have to have if we go back to pre-private option and everybody reverted back to the old plan? Is 91 the number that we're looking for? Is it going to be greater than 91?
Well, that 91 is one of several different state fund impacts associated with the private option.
Let me ask this for, thank you, Mr. Chair, for your time, so I'll stop. These numbers that are on, I think it's page 3, it's the one that says the private option recipient count, November 15th, 2016. What's the plus or minus error factor in this, given the fact that we're working with a we're not too confident in our eligibility program that we've got. We're having to do a lot of things manually at the catch-up time and everything. So I'm just curious, what's the plus or minus factor on this?
Well, I think that the issues with the eligibility system are going to more impact the traditional Medicaid program in terms of count. With the private option, since the vast majority of people are involved through the private plans and not enrolled as Medicaid Braille, we're actually making premium payments, and so that's an easier number of people to count.
All right, so I just want to make sure that this doesn't have anything to do with the eligibility. We're talking, this is just strictly private option numbers you're giving us, right? All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Irwin, you're recognized.
Thank you. Quick question on, you said that the 273, 246 may continue to rise. And just, if you could elaborate as to why.
I'm just looking at the trend there, the 4-month trend, we had 244, 254, 257, 273. It looks like the month-to-month change is not especially steady. It may be mitigating a little bit, but we've got 10,000 additional between November and December, another 13,000 in the next month.
The reason I asked that is because back when we did the actuarial studies, it was based on the 250. And then that information was derived from the economic status and the economic kind of picture of the people in the state of Arkansas. And that was the estimate as to those are the people that would fall between those economic indicators to be able to qualify for eligibility. So I guess I'm asking, so people are doing poorly in the state of Arkansas? Is our economy going down and more people are making less money and that's why that number's rising? Because that indicates that more and more people are going to fall below that poverty level. That's what has happened. That as that number increases, that should show that more people have fallen below 100% the federal poverty level.
Well,
Is that true?
not necessarily, because in the original projections, I think they were anticipating some amount of penetration into those economic bands, and it could just be that there's getting to be more of the existing folks within that category, a larger percentage, that are enrolling in the private option than was originally assumed in the original projection.
Okay. I mean, at some point though, only the people that qualify should be part of that population, and we've got to figure out how to get a handle on that to know how much it's going to rise, if that makes any sense. It just needs to be related to the economic status of the state and to those individuals, and that's why I was confused about that continuing to rise. Thank you.
Representative Charlotte Douglas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for taking my question. In doing your figures on cost estimates, are you estimating the difference in how we ran our old Medicaid, which was fee for service, as opposed to the private option where you're doing premiums every month and not just paying for service? Are you figuring that into cost projections?
So in identifying the cost savings associated with the, particularly those eligibility groups where there has been a decrease in costs and expenditures, those were calculated as the difference between the trend line from before the private option started to a trend line based on the actual experience since the private option started. The premium cost, it is not anticipated that necessarily the exact same people were on Medicaid and are on the private option. So in terms of how the structure of the program, fee for service versus the private carriers plays into it, that doesn't really have an effect on the cost savings. Because on the premium side, we're capturing the full premium, which includes the administrative overhead and the barriers, and on the fee for service side, you're capturing the projected claims experience.
So if we went back to, if we wound down the private option and we took that 100 to 138% of poverty off and put them back on the Affordable Care Act, which they would be eligible for, and we kept the 100 and down, have you projected what those costs would be? Because we wouldn't have to keep the 100 to 138 to 39 on our rolls, is that correct?
Well, for certain of these categories, for instance, non-pregnant, non-disabled adults between below 100% FPL, they had not been covered under Arkansas' traditional Medicaid program prior to the private option. So our assumptions for that all eligibility categories would go back to what they were prior to the private option.
We would have to re-ask for all those waivers, you're saying?
Yeah, for those several waivers, that could cover certain of those populations, but in terms of general eligibility, below 100%, except for the very lowest poverty levels, were not categorically eligible prior to the private option.
So in other words, your answer is that you haven't figured cost projections based on just the 0 to 100% that we would have to keep on if we wound down the private option.
And I guess I'm not entirely understanding. When you say that we would have to keep on that 0 to 100%, those were not covered under Medicaid prior to...
No, but if we wanted to do something for that population, because they weren't covered under either program. So you haven't done a projection?
We have not projected alternatives to the private option out for some of those groups now.
Okay. Thank you.
Senator Cooper, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You said a while ago you identified a projection in the future based upon a trend that you see taking place. Am I understanding that you're saying that you don't have a projection of where that's going to top out now?
So all of the numbers on slide 5 are expenditure. The private option expenditure. Well, let me take this up back. Where we don't know what's going to top out, or where I said we weren't sure whether it would continue to rise or not, was enrollment in the private option.
Right, that's what I'm asking.
Right. For the actual expenditures on the private option, it did assume a certain year-to-year growth in the cost, about 5%, I think it was, and so that is anticipated that it will continue to rise at that sort of medical cost trend.
So medical cost, you're projecting an increase but there is no numbers there on the numbers of people that are going to be taking those medical costs, which leaves an uncertainty there, which also is factored in these costs.
Yeah, the cost, the private option expenditure numbers include both the increase in population and increase in average cost per person. However, you know, we are effectively economic projection numbers going into the future. The best we can do is look at the current trends and project outward that those numbers can be affected by lots of different things.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Rayford, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a question to make sure that the definition is clearly out here. On the bottom of 5, you have economically sensitive taxes. Could you describe for me what you mean by that in this chart?
Sure.
What goes into it?
Yeah, and that can be calculated in different ways, but generally that's the macroeconomic effect of the additional federal funds. That is to say, based on the additional federal funds coming into the state, that generates some amount of economic activity, that whether that's income, sales, etc., that then has some tax, all of them have different taxes associated with it. This, there have been efforts to project that sort of thing by different groups. Rand Corporation did an analysis of the Arkansas expansion opportunity back before the private option was established, and they included an estimate like that. In this case, 4% also represents approximately the total state revenue as a fraction of the total state GDP. So the total money being spent in the state increases by a certain percentage. It's anticipated that the tax collections would also increase by a similar amount or corresponding amount.
So there's quite a bit of assumption on that.
Yes. Yeah, and in the next couple slides, we get into some more conservative assumptions that relax some of those.
Mr. Chairman, I think that reminds me of dynamic scoring, if I'm not mistaken, which I think we've asked for in many other aspects of the budget that has not always been included. Is that correct?
Yes.
When you make these projections, this is something that is not normally done. How confident are you in these assumptions?
For the purposes of economic modeling, these sorts of assumptions are often made. I recognize that for the purposes of scoring bills for budget purposes, through the legislative process, dynamic scoring is not typically done because it is complex. We wanted to break it out separately here to show so that if you wanted to discount the total by that amount, if you feel like that's not a reasonable thing to include.
And if we discounted those, that would significantly, from just looking at the numbers here, that would significantly change the outcome, right?
Yeah, I mean, there you have the 5-year estimate of the increase in collection from taxes at 336 compared to the total at 757. That is a pretty big chunk of that.
Is it also true that there are different ways of doing dynamic scoring? And when people talk about dynamic scoring, what they normally mean are feedback loops.
Yeah.
In other words, I pay you your salary, you pay 7% income taxes on it, and then you spend 93% of that salary, and then you buy some tires for your car, and then the tires that were bought, the sales tax on that is X, and the guy that sold the tires, he paid income tax on his, and then based on the number of times money cycles through an economy, that's typically known as dynamic scoring. That could have been done here, but actually was not. This is more of a direct assessment on the funds that are coming in. And as I recall, the 4% had something to do with that was the average income tax rate. And since most of this money goes to salary, that was kind of what that is. So there's already a dramatic conservatism in that number. If one were to think about static scoring and dynamic scoring, the way dynamic scoring is normally done, this really doesn't have true dynamic scoring. It merely has the very easily identifiable taxes that are associated with this money. Is that a pretty fair fair assessment of the way this is done?
Yes.
And I would add to that, the premium tax projections are coming off of expenditures to date projected forward according to the standards that are already been used in the private option. And that's usually pretty close in terms of reality, based on whatever you decide in terms of policy in the future. But the premium tax construction on there is usually a much more solid construction than macro, not to discount what Representative Collins just said.
Mr. Chairman, I do appreciate Chairman Collins for chiming in a little bit there. Maybe I should have been asking a question to you. But I just want to make sure that it's clear, because when you look at this economically sensitive taxes is not a hard number. It is an assumption. And it needs to, and I just want to make sure the members, when we look at that, this is not something that you could easily extrapolate, and you've got to make some assumptions on this. And I'm familiar, definitely, the old Chamber of Commerce rule that money turns over about 7 times in an economy, so I'm familiar with that. And I may have a question later on that, but I do appreciate you explaining it a little further, and would actually probably enjoy seeing some of the, what you might say, getting into the weeds, give you some of the detail on that. Appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Dismain, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just real quick, and you may have, I think you said that you may get into the weeds a little bit more, but the optional services, are you going to break those down later on? I'm aware of what, so I think it's TB testing, and it may be cancer treatments for women with breast cancer, and, what you're looking at, those are optional. That $21 million in that first year, that's optional. If we decide as a legislative body that we don't want to appropriate funds for those treatments or, those screenings, then we have the, obviously the ability to do that. However, the $91 million is actually part of our state plan, and those are things that would be mandated unless we passed laws to exclude them, or I guess push the executive branch to exclude them. So you have optional 21, you have $91 million that would be a mandate for us to cover, and then you have $37 million would be optional as far as the uncompensated care costs. If we decided that we did not want to cover those uncompensated care costs, there's nothing in the state that would force us to do so, except for the economic situation that may be aligned with that institution that's providing care. And then the other thing, I think that it's on this schedule, and this goes back a little bit to what Senator Raker and others are talking about, is the $37 million that would be short in regards to the the premium tax collections. That's an absolute too. You couldn't call it a mandate, but it's an absolute as far as a number. Your estimate, and there it is, okay. And then $64 million. So if you excluded that from the equation, what you would be looking at difference-wise that we'd be coming up with are mandated-wise is the $91 million short, the premium tax revenue that would be lost, and then subtracted from those two amounts would be the $41 million. Is that right? And the rest of everything else would be optional if you ignore the economic impact.
Yeah. Now, and I'll get into that a little bit on more conservative estimate over the next couple of slides.
Okay.
But I would mention, just note that whatever, you're right, the waivers are optional. However, whatever political and economic realities
I
all
understand.
put in the first place would probably come back.
Well, and that's part of my point. If we can have a breakdown, because I think members that, maybe have an opposite opinion of mine in regards to the program, probably need to understand fully what we're talking about eliminating or having to make up the dollar amounts for, and who those particular individuals are that are currently receiving treatments underneath the private option, or whatever you want to call it, as opposed to traditional Medicaid. So, but again, if we have a breakout, are you going to do that later?
It's not a breakout, but we will absolutely assumption once again in the next couple of slides, and basically run numbers as if you don't reestablish all those programs in detail.
Okay, I'll just wait and make sure that answers your question.
You finished, Senator Dismain? Senator Stubblefield, you recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we are throwing a lot of these numbers out here, would you agree with me that a lot of these numbers are based on assumptions?
All of these numbers are based on assumptions.
All right. In your previous testimony, you stated that between 40 and 50% of the enrollees in the private option show zero income. Is that correct?
Those are the numbers that come out of the eligibility system.
Do you have any 5-year projections on what that number would be for those enrollees 5 years from now?
No.
So there's no way to calculate that?
We have not looked at how that number or percentage of enrollees reporting zero income has changed over the course of the private option, so we have not yet.
Would the things that the governor has asked to be put in, the changes that he has asked to make, would it change that number?
Yeah, probably would. And a lot of the.
Are you sure?
Well, no, but looking at the sort of policies that are being proposed, like work requirements and so on, if there were to be a aggressive work requirement, for instance, included as part of the private option for eligibility, the number of people reporting zero income would probably be significantly less.
Didn't you tell us, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Mendel, didn't you tell us that there was a history of people that when they went on this program, they would slowly evolve off of it because their incomes would slowly rise and they would pass the minimum? In one of your early,
I don't recall.
you don't recall that? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Gray, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I got a question here. Right now, I believe when, like the private option population, the insurance companies that take that in through the marketplace, through AIM, they have to pay an assessment fee, and then that assessment fee can be deducted from their premium tax that they're supposed to pay. And do you know with these assumptions, the increase in premium tax revenue, is that just a straight tax number, or does that tax include the deduction they'll be taking for that percentage of assessment? And then also, one of the governor's recommendations for Arkansas Works is the employer mandate and trying to essentially run more people through SHOP. If we do that, then we don't actually get to collect any premium tax revenues. Would that not be correct based on the way statutes currently set up? So if that happens, we would actually greatly decrease that premium tax revenue.
So this is the premium tax, it may decrease the premium tax revenue associated with the private option. It would also decrease the state match requirement and the overall expenditure because if the number of people were to go down. Now, premium tax is also collected on private premiums, private health are paid in just the personal market. So while the premium tax associated with appeal might go down, if you had a modified version of the SHOP, you might see, or if there was additional enrollment there, you would see an increase in premium tax collection on that side.
Well, it's my understanding that if it goes through SHOP, the way it's currently set up, that no premium taxes are paid. Can someone verify that for me, or do you know?
I don't know.
Thank you.
Representative Hammer, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just 2 points. One, you just in answer to another question mentioned the eligibility as it relates to the private option. Is it a fair statement to say that as we get a handle on the eligibility system and that it becomes more efficient in what it's intended to do, that may be a direct driver to lowering the number of people that are on the private option because of eligibility? Is that a fair statement or not?
It depends. So I'm not sure if that would actually be the case because the eligibility criteria associated with the private option are driven by ACA requirements, and since they do go through one of the avenues to get into the private option is through the marketplace. I don't know. Maybe I should just.
I would like to comment on that. I think if I understand your question, Representative, if the Arkansas enrollment and eligibility system met the criteria that we have recommended in the data scrub portion early on in the project, there could possibly be a decrease in the number of people eligible for the private option based on the program integrity aspects of appropriate economic status, residential status, and other factors that pertain to eligibility. That, to me, is a program integrity issue, and to me, the answer to that question is it's possible it could go down.
Okay, then secondly, on this page right here, which is what you've got pulled up on the screen. What is a hard number based on historical facts for collection of data up to date that we can point to and say, this is what you saved without a shadow of a doubt, not projection, but actual savings? Which number is it going to be on that chart
To date, we're projecting it for future.
today?
We don't, this chart is 2017 through 2021. This does not include any potential savings today.
Okay, but a while ago, testimony was given, I thought I heard that based on, the last history or previous history, this is what we know we saved so far. What was that number that was given, or did I just not listen real good?
I have not cited any numbers for 15 and 16 on this one.
So we don't have a hard number sitting here today in committee that we could look at and say as a result of private option, we can say this is the number that we have saved.
I don't have that in any of these slides now.
But do we have that number, whether it's in the slides or not? Do we have that number?
What we can do is look at, say, the 2017 number, where we've got a net impact on state funds of $206 million, and effectively project backwards and say, it's probably in that sort of range this year.
So everything on that chart right there, the 2017, it's a fair statement to say that the number put up there for 2017 savings is based on actual history of claims and everything prior to this number.
It is, along with assumptions about what those claims would have been in the absence of a private option.
All right, thank you.
Roseanne Boyd, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so I'm still stuck back on the growth, and that feeds into this, so I'm sorry I'm getting those questions answered. Is there any way to know, are we actually having people moving into the state of Arkansas? Because say like Fort Smith is a border town with Oklahoma where they didn't have the Medicaid, is there any way to know what exactly is causing that growth, and is it due to changes in the population? Thanks.
I don't have the answer to the interstate migration question, but what we can say is that based on our scrubby enrollment data, a lot of the folks for whom would be best available for best address was actually out of state, were then subsequently shown to now have a legitimate in-state address. So the answer is maybe, but we don't have any hard data to support that.
Thank you.
Okay, that's all we have on the queues. You guys can press on.
Now, going on to slide 6, as I mentioned, we did do some more conservative assumptions and relax some of the assumptions of the previous model. Specifically, in the next slide, we have, or not in the next slide, in the numbers on this slide, we assume that the AR Health Network is not reestablished and that only half of the savings due to the decrease in expenditures in the SSI groups would be attributable to the private option. And then also that none of the state-funded outlays for uncompensated care would be reinstated. Overall, the 5-year impact of those, with those assumptions, is about $363 million, or a little less than half of the overall impact when those assumptions were made in the original way. In the next slides, we go on to some, to address a couple other questions that have arisen since the last meeting. John relayed that Senator Chesterfield had a question about the overall 5-year impact of the state fund, or the private option and the other ACA agreement. We had gone over some of these numbers in the past, but I just wanted to sit through this table to make sure that we cover that. The first 3 lines represent the funds associated with private option. The 5-year projected federal match for the private option is about $8.4 billion. The total state match over that period is about $600 million, making for a total PO funds of about just over $9 billion. The last 3 lines on this have more to do with other changes that were implemented by the Affordable Care Act that affect healthcare providers in the state. There are, of course, other 5 years, about $5 billion in the exchange subsidies. And then at the same time, there's been a decrease in federal funds flowing to Arkansas through the ACA through certain taxes and rate changes. Over these 5 years, that amounts to about a net decrease in federal funds of just under $10 billion. The net of those is negative $5 billion or so. One way to read these number statements as said is that in the absence of the PO, you will have that net negative $5 billion or so. And if you add back in the PO funds at $9 billion or so, that changes to a positive form again from all the ACA accounts.
So let me just make sure I understand. These are not summary charts from the top to the bottom. For instance, the $5 billion is, I guess, $9 billion is what has been taken out in federal dollars, exclusive of what impact the private option has had.
Correct.
And the private option has brought in about $10 billion.
Correct. Yeah, the first two lines, I should have done this more clearly maybe. The first two lines added together are the third line, and the fourth and fifth line added together are the fifth line.
So the net impacts of, if there were no Medicaid expansion, the net impact on the state of the Affordable Care Act would have been minus $5 billion over this 5 years. But because of the matching dollars from the expansion, it could be up to a positive $5 billion.
Right around that, or four. Negative 5 plus 1.
Okay, we got a question from Senator Bismarck, you're recognized.
Yeah, and on your change in the inflow, I mean, that does not include the outflow, which there is, I mean, there's some outflow because of the ACA from the state of Arkansas, so you have employer taxes and that sort of thing that would, you have a number of different things, and are those part of your equation? For instance, those companies that have, over the set number of employees, they're currently not having insurance, and they're penalized.
Yeah, that's captured in the tax rate funds. So the line.
Okay, decrease in federal funds. Okay, I just didn't, it's a little bit different, but I understand.
Yeah,
All right.
Okay, press on.
We had an outstanding question about the growth in pharmacy expenditures compared to the growth in pharmacy expenditures countrywide. And the slide here has the fee-for-service Medicaid program in red. And for several years, even back to 2009, before the start of the slide, the department was able to maintain near flat and sometimes decreasing pharmacy trend when you compare the spend year over year as a trend. And we just wanted to show that even though we have come out of a period of about 5 years of low single-digit and sometimes decreasing spend, that in the last 2 years there's been a significant increase. And that's not unique to you as a state. It's not unique to the Medicaid fee-for-service program. It's a countrywide effect. So all you're supposed to see on this slide is that the lines are about the same. And hats off to the department. In several years you performed, where the red line is below the blue line, the department performed better than the country at large in managing pharmacy expenditures. And next slide.
Okay, we got a question on that. Representative Boyd, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that question. So, now, clarify one. Because all of a sudden you see a big gap in 2015 between the U.S. and Arkansas. I have been led to believe that gap is primarily due to an expensive hepatitis C drug that we don't really have a choice but to pay for, but once the patients are treated and we're done with that, then we don't have that ongoing expense. And so that's what really accounts for that big gap in 2015. Am I correct or in my understanding or incorrect?
So good in your understanding that once those patients' Hep C clears and the drug's very effective, above 95% effective if you take a whole course of therapy, that in the next fiscal year, we project this Arkansas line, the red trend line, to go down to about 5% growth again. So once we get over this hump of treating hepatitis C patients, which we're required to do, we think the impact will go down to a single digit, again, about 5%.
Okay. Follow up, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
Okay, so just to clarify, the big gap is due to a single drug that should not be the same ongoing expense. So it's not like all of a sudden the Arkansas Medicaid program did a bad job in 2015. There was an expense that regardless of who was managing it, that we were still going to have that expense as a state.
Correct, and that's a large driver to the gap. Remember, there's also, on the next slide, I'm going to talk about the impact of moving from generic drugs and brand drugs as we've known them forever to more specialty drugs, biotech drugs, and injectable drugs, and they just are more expensive. So coming to market are more expensive products. Hep C was very unique in that the treatments for it caused this spike.
Okay, thank you.
Just kind of to follow up on that, and I think, Representative Boyd raised the question in relation to is the 5% assessment that we're using on an estimated growth rate over the next 5 years as we determine what kind of savings we need realistic. And I guess what I would ask you is based on what we've heard here today and the spike due to the hepatitis C drug and so on, do you feel like the 5% though is still going to be a reasonable and best guess number?
Yes, for two reasons. One is the 5% is for the overall program. We didn't apply growth factors at behavioral health, DD, pharmacy, long-term care. We didn't project the future growth at the sub-program levels. We did it at the full program. But like I said, we expect pharmacy after this 1.5-year spike here to go back to about 5%. So it'll be in line with the total projection.
Why did we expect it to be 5% when they were actually down around 1 and 2% for so many years?
As I said, there are other expensive products coming to market for hemophilia and other patient types that are covered by the Medicaid program, which are more expensive than typical tablets, capsules, and pills. They look like injectable drugs. They tend to be more expensive. They're used by very few people, but even a few uses are going to keep the growth above that historical 0 to 1 and look more like 5%.
Okay. First, I have the right answer.
Just to qualify, for that red spike from 13 to 15, is that the one that is tied into the hepatitis C drug?
Yes, sir.
Okay. If you took that out, what would if you take that drug out, what would you predict that the 13 to 15 spike might have been? Is there any way to determine that?
Sitting here, don't have an answer.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Chesterfield, you recognize.
Thank you. I keep hearing about the hemophilia drugs and all of that. Could you tell me what solution we have then for those individuals who suffer from hemophilia? What is normally done for them? They go without care or what happens?
No, they don't have an option to go without care. Their condition is life-threatening, so it's treated or pass away.
But we're dealing with the cost as being astronomical. So even if the cost is astronomical, how does that contribute to this conversation when the individual is required to have medicine? I guess that's what I'm trying to figure out. Am I making any sense? Not a good question. Because what I'm getting from this is we're proposing that we eliminate those drugs because of their high cost. But that's not what you're saying.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. That's not the recommendation at all. Those drugs have to be covered by CMS mandates, and they just happen to be very expensive, used by a very small number of children and adults.
And just one distinction here. The spike due to the hepatitis C drugs is not related to the hemophilia drugs. The hep C drugs are a full treatment that will make the disease go away, whereas the hemophilia that is not going away. But this spike is not associated with hemophilia, it's associated with hep C.
Well, just one last question, and I'm sure this is long, because I'm trying to figure out why we don't treat hepatitis C early on, rather than, as we seem to be doing here in this state, after it becomes full blown. Would that make a difference? Does your research talk about if it's treated early on and we're able to skim it, does that save state money, or is it in our best interest to get it on or not?
People with early hepatitis infections don't cost the state a lot of money. They run around, go to work, and go to school, and don't have, although they have a chronic health condition, it's not costly until the disease progresses. And I think, not just here in the state of Arkansas and the Medicaid program, but nationwide, we're seeing what's called a warehousing of patients. We warehouse them at the early stages of the disease, and we don't treat them until they're likely to become expensive.
Are you finished there, Judge Bill?
Next slide.
We got one more here. Representative Boyd, you recognize?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just wanted to follow up with a couple things after Senator Chesterfield and some other kind of discussion right here. So point number one is when we're siloing our budgets and we're saying pharmacies in this bucket and the doctor's offices in this bucket, those pharmacy costs due to the technology might actually lower the medical costs down the road. So if we don't have to pay for a liver transplant or something else. So that's the challenge of not looking at the total Medicaid budget, but siloing each thing. Is that correct? Am I understanding that appropriately?
No, that's a reasonable way to frame it, which is why we did our cost projections as an overall rather than trying to make specific projections within each program.
Okay, and then just a follow-up point, just very quickly. So at the last task force meeting, we discussed this issue of new technology becoming available, and it's not just in pharmacy. It could be a new lab, it could be a new surgery, it could be new things. So we talked about, as we negotiated a waiver, including some language that would help us with that. Is that still the plan going forward? I mean, do y'all remember having that discussion last task force meeting?
Yes, and I think in general, in construction of a global waiver or an individual waiver, you want to give as much flexibility from CMS, also with concrete budget included within that waiver as an amendment process.
Okay, well, Mr. Chair, I think this slide is very clear about why we're making that point, and I don't know whose job it is to document that and make sure that as we start talking about waivers, but I do think that I want to know somebody is responsible for making that point, so when we have that discussion, that it's made at the appropriate time. I mean, I might not be in the room, you know what I'm saying?
You will be in the room.
I will be in the room, okay. I don't remember.
And then just to break down the trend on the last slide a little more, we did break it down to brand drugs and generic drugs. And although we hear a fair amount in the lay press about the increasing cost of generic drugs, here in the state of Arkansas Medicaid program, it does not bear out over the last 3 fiscal years. Your average cost of a generic prescription has been about flat. All of the increase has been in brand drugs, and that supports what I said earlier. It's especially new injectable biotech products, which are brand drugs that are causing the increase in cost per prescription.
The next item on the agenda is a response to Senator Ingram's question about the comparison of the costs of the Arkansas Developmental Disability Services Program in relationship to other states. And we had submitted some aggregate budget numbers to the senator, but we thought that this is more illustrative of the impact on a per capita basis. As you can see, Arkansas is about in the middle compared to the whole country. But, excuse me, as we noted early on in the project, the comparable costs with adjacent and southern states, if you look to the right, you'll see that the majority of the southern states and adjacent states are below the average cost, just as a point of fact. The only close state next to y'all in some regards would be West Virginia. West Virginia is exaggerated by a series of difficult lawsuits that the state faced in terms of their average cost.
Senator Ingram, you're recognized.
So, Richard, if we could bring up our spending, just trying to look at ways that we can address the wait list. I mean, it's unconscionable that we've had people on this wait list for 7 or 8 years and 10 years and trying to get services. So if we just came up to the national average on what we're spending, then we could eat in. I can't even remember, can somebody remind me how many millions of dollars it would to eliminate the wait list? So we're $3, $4, $5, $6 million does anybody
Well,
remember
you
that?
have approximately 2,800 folks, 2,900 folks on the DD wait list, and depending on what your average cost would be, we'll give you an idea. If it was, $10,000 per person, then it would be that factor of the 2,900 people. Your average waiver costs are $50,000, $52,000 in this state according to DDS. So if it was an average waiver cost, it would be substantial hundreds of millions of dollars.
Thank you. Okay. Members, we're on item E now. It's pressing on your agenda there. So if you want to see where we're at, item E. You guys press on.
Just an update on the eligibility project. Nothing really that much has changed since the last task force meeting. CMS was here in the last week of February. They seemed to find everything going well, and they were on board with the approach that DHS had taken with going forward with an SI vendor. The DHS is working right now on their requirements for the RFP that will go out later this year, I think right around the June timeframe. And the following schedule appears to still be on track and on schedule. So just a little bit more to say that currently the backlog of cases, there are two situations for eligibility recipients not getting processed through the system as quickly as you might hope. And one of them is that the backlog of cases from the federal marketplace can't be quickly processed due to missing or inconsistent data, that this is being resolved over time, and this backlog is being reduced. And also due to the regular Medicaid renewals that have a backlog, and that also is reported to be improving over time.
You got a question here, Representative Hammer, you recognize?
Thank you. Maybe if you can't answer this and the chair wants to defer, I'm just curious if you know what the current backlog was at the time you did this report. I saw the article. I think we've got all the newborn babies pretty well processed and handled. They're taken care of. But is that all of them, or is there new numbers going to be coming out next month, or what did you find about the actual backlog?
Well, you're correct on the newborn babies. That issue seems to be resolved, and next report we can kind of present to you what the trending is over time. I don't have a slide on that this time, but next time we can.
Mr. Chair, if you want to bring that up now, that's fine. At some point, I'd like to get an update on the backlog. If they had to shift all the manpower over to take care of the babies, how far behind are we now in the other populations? And have we chipped away at that? And at an appropriate time, I'd just like to get that information. And one other question on the Curium system. When you talk about the system is improving as additional fixes continue to come into place, what's the end game as far as when you see all the fixes actually in place, if we're going to continue with the Curium product?
Well, again, the fixes do continue to go into place, and the RFP, as I understand it, will be asking for vendors to bring solutions if they feel that the solutions that they can offer provides a better value to the state of Arkansas. So I think there isn't an answer to that question yet.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, now you just include that the next time you update this item to the backlog.
Yep.
Okay. Go ahead and press on. We're going to item F now, members. couple of findings that TSG wants to report to us.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You may recollect that we looked at the 25 highest cost contracts in DHS, and this is an update on one of them, as we thought that there were some factors here that were important that the task force members know about. This slide and the succeeding slide were originally in a prior presentation. This is to update you on the use of the IT system to populate the into RAI assessment tools. Real briefly, DHS made a decision around 2011 to use the inner RAI assessment tools for long-term care, developmental disability services, and behavioral health. It was a three-phase project, and the first contractor crashed and burned at the cost of about $5 million. The second contractor, Concentrix, was brought in. This was a contract that was not RFP'd, apparently through the IT management of the state. The decision was made to use a contractor already under contract for a different project, and that was Concentrix. It was signed in 2014, and as you can see, there were three phases of the project: assessment plans of care and individual services budget based off of the scoring, if you will, of the assessment process. This slide 16 was a report of the project status at the time we reported. What we're reporting now today was that the project itself, in relationship to the original goal of integrating the RAI across all three disabilities, is pretty much not going to happen. DHS, as we reported back then, has simply not been involved with the project. The progress to date in the long-term care system is that DAS uses the RAI for initial assessment, and then it stops. The assessment goes into the Concentrix system and stays there. DDS is using the same thing, however, they don't really use it for plans of care. The inner RAI assessment goes into the Concentrix system and stays there. As a result of that situation, DHS has been negotiating to make a final payment to this vendor of approximately $1.1 million, and that is currently under negotiation. It's a significant negotiation. An amendment was signed in February, I believe, 2014, that added an additional component of licensing for an additional 5-year period of time beyond the initial contract. This is a clause that DHS, DAS, pretty much in the lead, is trying to rectify by a final payment that would virtually expire the Concentrix contract. That's one factor. The other factor is that the Concentrix construction, the software construction, will not be usable in the future as the state modifies the waivers we hold according to the 3 tiers of acuity levels for waiver programming and costing and plans of care. So essentially, we feel that the end result here is going to be an unusable system that the state would pay significant money for. An additional factor is that this project, I don't know how this happened, but this project actually started before an IAPD was in place, so a significant portion of these funds were paid for with 100% funds for a Medicaid-related IT system. And we thought this was important information, and we would suggest that DHS has some updates from their perspective. Our recommendations on this are pretty much consistent with what we've already spoken about. We think you need to review the contract negotiations specific to this project, and that any kind of additional work in this field, meaning independent universal assessment, plans of care, and costing for individual plans of care on some sort of algorithmic basis, comply with whatever you determine your vote's going to be here over today or into the future, and also that you should get updates from DHS after today.
Okay, Representative Hammer, you got a question? Well, we've got someone from the department to speak to this, is that right? Okay, Representative Hammer, you want a question now, you want to the department? Okay, let me just ask a couple, and then we'll have the department come down. Before they do, the total amount of this contract is how much?
The total amount of the original contract was approximately $15 million. They paid $9.459 million to date, and the $1.1 million would be hopefully the final payment to this tender.
And they're negotiating, terminating this contract because there's no value to what we're getting?
I'm not specifically aware of the answer to that. I know it's the intention to expire the contract. It may be coming to the end of the 5-year period of time. I think DHS will have to speak to this.
Okay, let's just have, who's from DHS must speak to them. Okay, you guys will have a seat and identify yourself for the record. You're recognized.
I'm Craig Cloud, Director of Aging and Adult Services, Department of Human Services.
Mark Whitehead, Director of Department of Human Services. Mr. Jones, quick overview, and happy to answer any questions you may have. This is, for those of you that are going to review, this is the same contract that we've discussed extensively in JPR since we about last May under required bid regarding this contract. Where we're at now is they're finalizing the work on the first phase for visualization. We do have that $1.1 million we're discussing with them, which I would describe as a reset button. That payment is intended to close out our obligation under the contract up to this point, start fresh so we know where to go forward from that. Now, we have not decided what the future of this product is, where we need to go next, because that depends in large part on where the task force goes. So in other words, if the task force is versus managed care, and that's the way the state goes, that may dictate one outcome for this software platform. If you go to managed fee for service, you may be a completely different outcome. So right now, we're just on hold until we see where the task force is, where the governor goes, and what decisions we make in the future.
Representative Hammer, you're recognized.
Are we talking about, when we talk about Concentric, so are we talking about a contract? Because just in all due fairness for both of y'all sitting at the table, both of y'all inherited this, is that correct?
Yes. Yes, sir.
I know it's correct, I just want to give public acknowledgement that both of y'all inherited this mess. And what you inherited under was under what terms? Was it a contract, was it an RFP? Expound on that if you would, please.
It was a little unusual situation. First, through a state cooperative contract, purchased as a software license as well as maintenance and support. But there was some contract language that was agreed to, I believe it was back in February 14, regarding maintenance and support, and that's where we've had some differences with the contract and what's owed and what we're trying to work out right now.
Right, but which it was a backdoor approach to get this thing in, which now we've gone all the way through the building. We're coming on the other side where we can maybe shut the door behind us on the way out of a very unpleasant experience. But are we contractually obligated, even though nobody likes how we got here, are we contractually obligated to that 1.1, or is there any room for negotiation, or for us to be good business people in the state? Where are we?
I think there are several possible points of view on what our obligations are, and so we're working to get best in the state, is how I feel.
But either way, we're going to end up with something that we can't use when it's all said and done, unless what happens?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, Representative Hammer, where we are, we're in the process of testing the final deliverable that we have asked this vendor to present. But as Mr. Kellogg stated earlier, there's some issues with the license. It's the fact that now the licenses are compatible under a Microsoft 14 platform. When the state moves to a Microsoft 16, we're kind of getting into the weeds here, Microsoft 16 platform under a 365 agreement, that may render that there are some configuration changes that will have to occur with that current model to ensure that we're compliant with that Microsoft 16 platform. So where we are now, we're asking the vendor to deliver those items that give us the assessment functionality, as Mark stated earlier, with regards to aging and our requirements. The $1.1 million payment actually, as we negotiate that and as we include defined deliverables and what our expectations and services are for that payment, will cover us through the end of the year. And then the decisions that we make regarding go live and functionality of that product, as Mark stated earlier, will match the task force administration's directions and recommendations for traditional Medicaid moving forward. And we want to make sure that that path that we take moving forward aligns with that direction. So in essence, that 1.1 million technically is a hard stop for where we are now. And then any future negotiations or contract, whether with this vendor or under an RFP with a new vendor, depending on managed fee for service or managed care, will be dictated and will align with that path moving forward.
And the test that's currently undergoing now, what are the results of it? Are we seeing positive, negative results, or what are you seeing?
Yes, sir, we're receiving positive results, and this vendor has met the requirements that we have made of them to date. And obviously, you know, as Chair JPR, you're very well aware of the progress and issues that we've had over the course of this past year, and I may state that we are pleased with the progress made, but in order to make the most appropriate decision moving forward, we need to make sure that those decisions align with the direction of this task force, the legislature, and our governor administration moving forward.
And will that assessment piece be able to be used across all the disciplines under consideration, whether we go ASO, managed care, work with DHS? Is that assessment tool tested out positive enough that it can be used across all disciplines?
Talking about the intra-RAI assessment that we're currently using, definitely in terms of behavioral health, developmental disabilities, I believe that we would want to have further discussions with those stakeholders, those providers, as well as internally at DHS to ensure that the steps we take regarding independent assessment are appropriate to the directions and decisions moving forward. I think one thing that is actually standard and is agreed upon is there must be an independent assessment for those populations, whether it's the intra-RAI or another instrument. In my opinion, remains to be decided until the direction is cast by the task force, the legislature, and administration moving forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. And obviously, we know JPR is working on this, and we're not going to take the role of contract review committee, but I do appreciate being brought forward. I guess what I would ask you in general terms, though, so we spent $10 million. Have we got a product that is worth $10 million?
We do have a product, and it is working. It is meeting the expectations set by the Division of Aging. It has been working for Bishop Douglas disabilities, and it is a platform that we can build on to meet other needs, depending on direction task force goes.
So maybe.
Yes.
And the other
It hasn't been the most ideal of circumstances the past year.
The other question I would ask is, this pause or reset or hard stop or whatever we call it, that we're going to spend $1 million to get to that point, would we be doing that if there were no efforts to do traditional Medicaid reform and the type of things that we're looking at? Would that have happened, or would we just be pressing through to completion?
We would still have those contractual obligations that we have to work for. So yes, sir, I would say we'd be going to this 1.1 million regardless of whether we're looking at Medicaid reform or not.
Senator Ray, what you're recognizing.
Mr. Chairman, I might add, this maintenance agreement that we're negotiating through the end of the year basically gives us access to this portal, which is critical in the interim until we can develop and determine what the most appropriate long-term path is that matches the direction of the administration, task force, and legislature moving forward.
Okay, Senator Ray.
Mr. Chairman, I wanted to ask a question specifically. Have you personally been to the processing center in Batesville that has to actually does all the processing for private option in Rodeo?
Yes, sir, I have.
I don't know if you've spoken to them lately, but they continue to have real problems with procuring software.
Yes, sir.
Are you aware of that?
Yes, sir, and I've gone up there and talked to several employees extensively. The county administrator who runs that process is very good. He keeps us up to date on where they're at. They're having performance issues, they're having other issues that we're working through.
I do want to make mention, and actually you're exactly right, Mr. Shepard, that runs that center has done a tremendous job. And I just wanted the chairman to both know that as it relates to that, they've done that with no extra positions, which I think is amazing that over the past couple of years they've been asked to take on that duty with no extra positions. And it's a tremendous job, and I think that he's done, like I say, a heck of a job under the circumstances, but I just know that we have to address this, no matter what happens. And if we're gonna have that center be tasked with doing that, they've got to have something that works. And so I do appreciate you making sure you're coordinating with them to give them some relief. So thank you, sir.
Okay. Is that all y'all have on this? Yes. Stevens Group folks, y'all have anything to add to item E, or item F, I guess we were just finishing up? What y'all got? Okay, members, we've got some folks who have some, Senator Ingram, you have?
I've got a couple of follow-ups.
Okay, you're recognized.
Richard, the number, I'm sorry, it doesn't have anything to do with Mark or Craig, thank you. Richard, the follow-up regarding the waiver and the wait list, the number that you used with the 50 to 60,000 that we've talked to, does that include the halo effect? Because isn't that Medicaid, traditional Medicaid there, shouldn't that really be deducted from that number?
That's a great question. My understanding is that 52,000 is the average waiver cost, and halo effect would be in addition to that.
In addition
to that.
Could you find out whether that's correct or not?
I will do that. Also, I recollect reporting that the people that are on the waiting list, that are enrolled in Medicaid, are receiving medical services, and we had provided that information and cost, which I don't recollect, so I don't want to give a number right now, but we did come up with a hard number on the actual halo effect cost for the people on the waiting list.
Okay. One other thing, I was hoping that John Stephen could be here. You're smiling.
He's hard to replace.
I understand that. I think you're probably aware of this. An esteemed colleague of mine has had an ongoing discussion about the employer insurance. If you have a qualified plan of 50 employees and you meet the eligibility of the ACA requirements, then you can't opt out of an employee plan and take the private option. And I've heard this both ways. My insurance companies tell me the employee can't opt out. And then I have somebody that I esteem I really think a lot of their opinion tell me that they have a company and that people are opting out of it. So I'm trying to figure out which it is.
I can address a little bit of that. Typically for small group insurance, there are minimum participation requirements, and so have to be perceived or implemented by or communicated by the employer as a requirement that everybody participate. Usually those minimum participation requirements are 75 to 85%. They're generally either in statute or regulation or just enforced by the carriers as a matter of maintaining actuarial stability in their plans. But generally speaking, individuals can in fact opt out of the employer offered insurance. But if that gets to a certain level, the carriers won't issue the plan because that minimum participation amount won't be reached. So an employer could potentially communicate or even at the employer level enforce a requirement that everybody participate or implement in a way that made it appear that way.
But if you have a qualified plan, if you're a business owner and you have 50 employees, and you have a qualified plan that meets the, 9.5% of their, what did you say? Of their income, 9.5%, that is a qualified plan. It was always my understanding that the employee could not opt out of that plan if it met those criteria.
I'll have to go back and look at the specifics.
Again, they had, I think one of the things in Arkansas Works is designed, Senator Ingram, to get what you just said as part of the plan moving forward. So when you check that, you may want to look at it, but I think that's one of the elements that Arkansas Works would change versus the private option.
I'm contending that, and I have information to back up that income trumps it. If you have a qualified plan, you cannot opt out of it, and I cannot find where, I mean, I know that this is the very point of my question, is that we're addressing something that I think is covered under the ACA. I am not aware of an instance that is allowable if you have a qualified plan, you're over 50 employees, the plan meets the ACA requirements, that an individual employee can opt out. I've researched it, I've got the backup information, but I understand from others that people are doing it. So,
Well, let me just make a comment on that if I can, Senator Ingram, because I will tell you that, well, I actually, to Secretary Burwell in our first visit, gave a real world example. Now, we go up and above the over 50, but we have a qualified plan and we have members who have done exactly what you're talking about. And I use that as an example of my concern about we are providing better coverage for folks on the state-sponsored plan than is required under a qualified plan. And I mean, and none of her staff there disagreed that that is in fact possible and in fact a problem. Their response to that problem was, we will provide wraparounds and employer-sponsored support to people who do that, or to employer-sponsored insurance to give them the same kind of plan that they have through a private option plan or through the state-sponsored plan. But at least at that level, they said, yeah, it happens. And as I said, I know that it happens, and I don't see any indication where it's been told that it's illegal.
thank you.
We got 3 more on the list here. Representative Boyd, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this might be more of a question to the chairs. Before we move into the next section, is there any way we can get like the high-level pie graph of the breakdown of where we spend the money in Medicaid and then Medicaid expansion, so we know exactly how many dollars we're talking about when we talk about developmental disabilities with and without human development centers and behavioral health? The high-level math helps me. So I don't know if that's possible.
I guess what I would do, I would say this is, I'll ask Representative Boyd for the staff and for Stephen's group to try to find some of that stuff. We'll take a long enough break that they'll have time to research some of that. I don't really think it's fair to say, go find that right now, just wait. But it is a fair question. We'll try to provide that data and see if we can't get some of that high-level stuff presented before. Just so you know, we're going to break till 2 o'clock to give time for them to get some of that stuff gathered up. And we've got some folks who've got some conflicts with some other meetings in the next couple hours. So they should have time to get some of that stuff gathered up. We'll try. Representative Gray, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a response to Senator Ingram's question. My understanding is it's based on income level, it doesn't have anything to do with whether you're 50 employees or less or more. If it's the 0 to the 139% that the state of Arkansas covers, then we do have it to where you can opt out of it. You can either take your employer insurance or you can take what you qualify for on the exchange. But if you are on the federal exchange, they have a more strict requirement that you cannot opt out. That's the way I understand it to be, which I think is kind of why the governor was wanting to put that employer mandate on the smaller businesses. So I don't have a complete answer for that, but I do know that the income level does have something to do with it.
And to her point, I've also seen that where people who are above that poverty line because they have less kids or they make more money because then they would be on the exchange and they can't go on the exchange if they have a qualified plan and they're above the 138% is my understanding. That's all we have on the list. Do you all have more to cover, or do you need your slides here?
I think we're finished.
Okay, members, again, we're going to take a break here to give folks some time to get some information together because we got some big decisions coming up. We're going to regroup at 2 o'clock. I'd ask all the members, this is an important period to be here, so I would ask you to try to arrange your schedule to be here, get ready to go at 2 o'clock. We are adjourned.